Look at your arm right now. Really look at it. A few fine hairs, mostly bare skin. Nothing like what covers a chimpanzee, our closest living relative, who is wrapped head to toe in thick fur. Nothing like a gorilla, a baboon, or any other primate we have ever found in the fossil record going back millions of years. We are, by every reasonable measure, a naked ape, and that is deeply strange. Because fur is not a minor feature. Fur keeps you warm. It protects your skin from the sun, from insects, from cuts and scrapes. Evolution does not throw away useful things without an extremely good reason. So what was the reason? The answer reaches back nearly 2 million years, changes everything we think we know about human endurance, and reveals something extraordinary about what your body was actually built to do. To understand why we lost our fur, you first have to understand where we came from and what we were walking into. Around 6 million years ago, our earliest ancestors lived in forests. They were covered in fur like every other primate. Life was relatively predictable. Shade was everywhere. The canopy filtered the sun. Then the climate shifted. African forests began to shrink. Grasslands expanded. And some of our ancestors made a move that would change the entire trajectory of life on Earth. They stepped out of the trees and onto the open savanna. This was not a gentle transition. The savanna is brutal in ways the forest never was. There is almost no shade. The sun hammers the ground at full intensity for 8 to 10 hours every single day. Temperatures regularly push past 100 degrees Fahrenheit, and on that open plain, overheating is not a minor inconvenience. It is a death sentence. A brain that gets too hot stops working. Neurons begin dying at around 104 degrees Fahrenheit. Push past that threshold and you collapse. Push further and you do not get back up. Every large animal on the African savanna faces this same problem, and almost all of them solve it the same way. Lions rest in whatever shade they can find during the hottest hours. Elephants flap their enormous ears to radiate heat away from their bodies. Zebras avoid peak heat by staying as still as possible. The strategy across almost every species is identical. When the sun is at its worst, you stop moving and you wait. Almost every large African animal except one figured this out. Around 1.6 to 1.8 million years ago, something dramatic begins showing up in the fossil record. Our ancestor Homo erectus starts changing fast. Legs get longer. The skeleton reshapes itself for efficient upright movement over long distances. The torso narrows. The body is clearly being built for something new, something sustained, something that requires moving through heat rather than hiding from it. And researchers believe this is the exact moment when fur began disappearing and something extraordinary took its place. Something no other primate had evolved to this degree. Something that almost no other mammal on Earth possesses anywhere close to the same extent. Sweat glands. Human beings have between 2 and 4 million eccrine sweat glands distributed across the entire surface of their bodies. Most mammals have very few. Dogs cool themselves almost entirely by panting. Horses sweat, but nowhere near as efficiently as we do. Even chimpanzees have sweat glands, but thick fur traps the moisture against their skin, preventing evaporation, turning their own coat into a heat trap rather than a cooling system. Here is the physics that makes everything click. When sweat evaporates from bare skin, it pulls heat away from the body with remarkable efficiency. It is one of the most effective biological cooling mechanisms ever evolved, but fur defeats it entirely. Dense body hair blocks airflow, traps moisture against the skin, and holds heat in rather than letting it escape. So the choice that natural selection faced was actually very simple. Fur wins in a cold forest. Bare skin with sweat glands wins under a blazing equatorial sun on an open plain with nowhere to hide. And over hundreds of thousands of generations, generation by generation, the individuals who ran cooler survived longer, hunted better, and had more children. The fur disappeared, but losing fur created its own immediate crisis. And this is where the story gets even more interesting. Bare skin under direct equatorial sunlight is vulnerable in ways that furry skin is simply not. Evolution needed a solution fast. It found one. Melanin, dark pigmentation. The earliest humans who lost their fur almost certainly had deeply dark skin, and we can prove it through genetics. In 2004, researchers studying the gene MC1R, which controls skin pigmentation, found that the version producing dark skin in humans is extraordinarily ancient and extraordinarily conserved across populations. Natural selection was working aggressively to maintain it. Interestingly, chimpanzees actually have pale skin hidden underneath their dark fur. When that fur disappeared from our ancestors, selection for heavy pigmentation happened rapidly and thoroughly. For hundreds of thousands of years, essentially every human being on Earth had deeply pigmented skin. The variation in skin color we see across humanity today came much later, and it came from migration. When populations moved out of equatorial Africa into higher latitudes, into Europe and Central Asia, where sunlight is weaker and winters are long and dark, the equation reversed. Dark skin that blocks UV radiation also blocks the synthesis of vitamin D, which the body produces through UV exposure. In low sunlight environments, people with darker skin could not produce enough vitamin D. Lighter skin became an advantage and selection shifted accordingly. But that is a later chapter in a much longer story. The original human skin, the skin that emerged when fur disappeared, was dark. Now here is the part that most people never hear. The part that explains not just why we lost our fur, but what we actually gained in exchange. Because this trade was not about survival alone. It was about something far more aggressive than just surviving the heat. When researchers began studying human physical performance carefully, they uncovered something that sounds almost impossible. Human beings, despite being slower than virtually every large animal on the African savanna, are among the greatest long-distance endurance athletes on the planet. Not sprinters, endurance runners. Given enough distance and enough heat, a human being can run a horse into the ground. This is not exaggeration. It has been demonstrated in real competition. There is an annual race in Wales called the Man V's Horse Marathon, where humans and horses race together over 22 miles of difficult terrain. In its 4-decade history, humans have beaten horses outright multiple times. Under the right conditions, specifically heat and distance, we win. The mechanism is exactly what we have been building toward. Horses overheat. Their cooling system cannot keep pace with sustained exertion under a hot sun. A horse at full gallop generates enormous heat and has limited ability to shed it quickly. Humans, with bare skin and millions of sweat glands firing simultaneously, can offload heat so efficiently that we can keep moving long after every other animal on the savanna has been forced to stop and stand panting in whatever shade it can find. We did not lose everything, though, and what we kept tells its own story. We kept hair on our heads, almost certainly to shield the brain, our most heat-sensitive organ, from direct sun exposure, near major blood vessels and scent-producing glands, which researchers believe serve roles in temperature regulation and chemical signaling that we still do not fully understand. Males kept facial hair, which may have played roles in sexual selection and mate signaling going back hundreds of thousands of years. Even the fine, almost invisible body hair covering most of your skin right now is probably not entirely useless, particularly parasites, before they make direct contact. It is a subtle, early warning system, a whisper of something our ancestors once depended on far more heavily. None of it is random. Evolution kept exactly what still earned its place and discarded everything that had become a liability. 2 million years ago, our ancestors made a trade. They gave up the coat that every other primate still wears. They stood exposed under the African sun, naked and sweating, and they kept moving while everything else rested in the shade. It is why you burn in the sun without protection. It is why you can run farther than almost any other creature on this planet if you are willing to push long enough. You did not lose your fur because evolution made a mistake. You lost it because your ancestors became something the world had never seen before. Not the fastest animal, not the strongest, but the one that simply would not stop.